Well, good morning. Thank you for worshiping with us online at the Friendly Avenue Church of Christ. It is a joy to be together online today. We're a church that lacks a geographical center right now. We're scattered around. But we're not a church that lacks confidence as we continue to worship and lift up the name of God. Today's lesson comes from Psalm 46. It is a song written by Korah, a descendant of Levi who was given charge by God to lead God's people in songs of praise at the temple. Psalm 46 is a psalm of confidence as God's people lift up God's name even in times of crisis. Now, I know we've been in many situations that we would call crisis. We've been there personally, we've been there as a church, and we've been there nationally. The last time I was in a major crisis was in 2005. In 2005, I was living in Houston, Texas, and we were about 360 or so miles to the west of New Orleans. A major hurricane crashed into the port city, causing a breach in the levee system and inundating the city with flood. There were hundreds of people that were traveling to our city and almost overnight filled up our hotels. They were evacuees looking for help. And during that time, I learned a couple of lasting lessons. First, I learned that God has equipped and prepared the church to excel in times of crisis. In just a couple of days, I witnessed and helped lead churches unite across denominational lines to help our new neighbors. We were mediating conflicts between hotel managers and new customers, organizing food lines where we were distributing those items of need. I saw in those days the power of uncoerced love for one's neighbor. And that is what the church is made out of. Love that is freely given in times of need. The second lesson I learned was from a coworker that I was working alongside in those days. He had, just some years prior to the Hurricane Katrina, been working as a youth minister in Columbine, Colorado. He was there when one day a student entered a high school and took the lives of several people who were on campus that day. He told me, he said, I learned something during the Columbine shooting, that when times of crisis enter a community, not too many people feel confident in doing something. He said, I learned it is better to do something and be wrong than to do nothing at all. Because when crises come, we can be paralyzed by the uncertainty of the questions that confront us. During trying times, we're confronted with questions that don't have immediately clear answers. I was listening this week to some of the leaders around our country talk about what we should do. I overheard the governor of New York express his concern. Andrew Cuomo was asking the question that everybody was asking, when does this end? When does this come to an end? And he said, people want answers. And we do want answers. We're playing hide and seek with all kinds of questions that don't have clear answers. The governor continued, I want answers. I want answers. But the answer is, nobody knows for sure how this is going to end. We find ourselves cruising through crises, and we scurry forward without answers. I don't know what questions are plaguing you. I've heard a lot of people ask the question, who's to blame for all this? We recognize there are some losses in our lives that cannot be replaced. And we become somewhat upset and angry that we are where we are, and we want to know whose fault this is. Anger at its most natural state is always looking for somebody upon which it can thrust its wrath. And so we're like that man, that blindfolded man throwing darts. We just kind of hurl our arrows hoping we'll hit a bullseye. And I've heard some people blame God, like Pharaoh in Egypt. This is God's fault. Some people have blamed Satan, like Job. Some people have blamed China, Republicans, Democrats, college beach partiers, and preachers who just can't keep from holding services. And at the end of the day, our search for the answer isn't all that clear. Who's to blame for all of this? In times when questions plague us and confront us and bother us, and we can't seem to find clear answers that satisfy our curiosities, I invite you today to join me in Psalm 46, where we can find the answer to one question that was never and is never in doubt. For as we struggle to know what to say, we do know that there is a name whom we can call upon during these times. The question is this: who gets the praise? Who gets the glory? And who gets the honor? The answer to that question was never in doubt. For Psalm 46 encourages us and invites us in verse 10 to be still and know that I am God. For he says, I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted among the earth. And so it's Sunday. We've got our family. We're holding hands and we're praying. And we're invited by God's word to be still and to know that he is God and he will be exalted in this world. Psalm 46 verse 8 invites us to come and see, to shift our glance and to change what we're viewing. We're invited to shift our gaze from the chaos of creation to the stability of the Creator. And if you read through Psalm 46 with your family today or in your private devotional today, you'll see the psalm inviting us to shift our gaze from temporary relief to God's ever-present help in times of trouble. In days like today, I've been grateful for temporary relief. I think we all have become somewhat familiar with that term, stimulus. Stimulus is something that we're glued to the TV to find out about. How are small businesses going to be helped? How are the unemployed going to get relief? All this stimulus is helpful, and we're thankful for everything that comes our way. But at the end of the day, stimulus is a short-term fix. We might be stimulated, but we're not healed. And we begin to wonder how many stimulus bullets are in that revolver. And so Psalm 46 asks us to shift our gaze from those things that provide temporary relief to the God who is ever present in times of trouble. Psalm 46 invites us to shift our gaze from the proclamations of the nations to hear the voice of God. The nations are speaking, and when they speak, they change laws, they change policies, they adjust guidelines. It seems like every day there's a new guideline, a new policy, something has changed that impacts my life. And while nations can change laws, they do not have the power to protect us and to save us from the lawbreakers. For their voice has limits. But the voice of God speaks loudly in this world. And when God speaks, the earth melts and the lawbreakers tremble at their knees and they bow before the throne room of God. So Psalm 46 invites us to shift our gaze from the temporary relief to God's ever-present help, to shift our gaze from the proclamation of the nations to the voice of God, in Psalm 46 invites us to shift our gaze from the fragility of the world to the bulwark of God's strength. I think I was in 7th grade, maybe 6th grade, when I learned that the very earth upon which we're building our cities and our nations and our economies and our factories and our church buildings, the earth is built and established on a foundation that's full of cracks. There are faults all along inside it. It's a fragile foundation. It's a foundation of sand. We've been hearing that in these days we need a force and a power that is strong enough to keep our economy from descending into the utter abyss. Private industry companies can't do this on their own. They need governmental action to help rescue us and to keep us floating. And we're grateful for our leaders and our economists who are fighting and studying and preparing and working day and night to keep us afloat during these days of great crisis. But Psalm 46 invites us to another power, a higher power, a strength that will never end. During days of great trial, people throughout the centuries have found comfort in God. Believers have gained confidence in remembering who God is and what God has done. And Korah's psalm, Psalm 46, invites us to do just that. Many, many years ago, in the early mid-1500s, Martin Luther, who was a leader and a church a pastor in the town of Wittenberg, experienced what he called the greatest trial of his life. The plague had entered Wittenberg, and as it entered the city, as was customary in the time, many of the people in the city fled to the outskirts of town to find refuge and protection from the contagious disease. Now imagine not just your neighbors hunkering down in their homes, but just leaving the city altogether, not being able to text them or find them on your Apple phone where they're going. Luther was encouraged to flee as well, but he and his family stayed behind to care for the sick and those who were suffering. It is during those months of living in Wittenberg that Martin Luther was mentally exhausted, and he was carrying a great trial in his life. And in that moment, he drew strength from God's word and God's promises. Psalm 46 inspired him to write a hymn that he called a song of comfort, but we know as "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing, our helper amid the flood of mortal ills prevailing. And so even when nature thunders, the earth gives way and the mountains are falling into the sea, the name of God is exalted in this world. And even when the nations rumble against one another, for the nations war with economic spears, and they deflect blows with shields of propaganda, the name of the Lord will be lifted up. I don't know how you're doing. In our house, we're a little tired. I'll just speak for myself. I'm a little tired. It's only been 22 days or so, and I'm already zoomed out. I don't know how we can be stay-at-home people and be so busy and exhausted keeping up with our lives. It's a time that we have not seen in our lifetimes. During times of crises, sometimes people curse the name of God. They're angry. And sometimes people blame God. They're frustrated. But as believers and the scattered church of Christ, we lift up and we exalt the name of God. That was never a question. We always knew that whatever would come to our lives or whatever would enter our world, the name of God would be praised on our lips. And so we're invited today. It's Sunday. Get your family, hold hands, and pray. Be still and know that He is God. And while there's a lot of work to do, we may not be able to still ourselves physically from our work. We can be still in knowing that we can exist at rest without having all the answers to our questions. The governor was right. People want to know. We want to know. We have a lot of questions that we're asking. When is this going to end? Why is this happening? Who's to blame? What's the right thing to do? I think this week the question is, should I wear a mask or not wear a mask? A lot of questions with answers that are not so clear. And so today, we take comfort and rest in knowing that there are some questions where the answers are crystal clear. And today we lift up the name of God because we know who gets the praise. I want to thank you for joining us once again today on this Sunday as we have drawn comfort and encouragement from Psalm 46. Now, we are a scattered church, but we are not a church that is without confidence. And we are confident in the fact that this will be over soon and we will get together. And when we all get together again, remember what a day of rejoicing that will be.